what I thought to do this afternoon is to examine a diagram that I prepared a number of years ago, but I look back at it and realize that it is still what I believe pretty much a diagram of the harmony of the book of Daniel. And here is why I think that it is helpful if we do this. One of the main issues that people have with our understanding of the book of Daniel is Daniel chapter 8. Those of you who are familiar with the issues surrounding the prophecies of Daniel, you will know that most Christians, and even many who claim to be from our background, that means they have an Adventist background, Daniel chapter 8 is always an issue. I think we mentioned this last week as well, or the week before. But Daniel chapter 8 is always an issue because most Christians insist that Daniel chapter 8 does not have to do with a prophecy of the end time. They say it has to do with something that happened to the Jews during the time of the Greek king Antiochus Epiphanes. And as I've pointed out before, this creates a huge problem in my mind, because the book of Daniel is very clearly a book of prophecy dealing with the end of time. But what they have done is take one prophecy out of the book and they apply it to the time of the Maccabees, the Maccabean, when the book of Maccabees was written, the Maccabean brothers in the time of the Greek king, as I said, Antiochus Epiphanes, a couple of thousand years ago, more than maybe about 2,600 years ago. So even this is very persuasive to many Adventists. A lot of Adventists have abandoned the interpretations of prophecy, that even how we see things, because of that particular chapter. And so this afternoon, what I want to do is to look at the book of Daniel and to look at the 4 lines of prophecy in Daniel. And as we go through step by step, you will see why I believe it is there's very compelling evidence to say that these 4 lines of prophecy, they're all talking about the same thing. They cover the same prophecies from a different angle. So anyway, when we look at it, you'll understand what I'm saying. So I would like to use an image, PowerPoint image. Let me see. Right, this should be fine. This should be fine. I think you all can see my screen. All right, I have one big image, but I'm going to take it piece by piece. And I'm going to take it piece by piece. And as I go along, I will highlight and comment on different parts of this image. Okay, so my biggest highlighter. All right. So what we have on the screen is a representation of the first part of the prophecy in Daniel. Now, Daniel chapter 2, we're all familiar with. Everybody knows this prophecy like the back of your hand. Daniel chapter 2 is the prophecy of the great image. In Daniel chapter 2, the first part of the image was the head made of gold. Nebuchadnezzar saw an image. I don't want that. I want a smaller. Nebuchadnezzar saw an image with a head made of gold. And everybody understands that this head of gold represented the kingdom of Babylon. Then in Daniel chapter 7, I wonder if I should look at the whole chart first of all. You know what? I don't want to. Let me look at the whole chart. All right, let me look at the whole chart so that we can get an idea of the whole before I begin to break down the parts. All right, now as I'm going through, I'm going to invite you all if there's something I say that is not very clear, I'm going to invite you to stop me, all right, and to ask me to go back over it. So the left of the chart, on the left here, I have the different kingdoms and events that are represented overall in all of these chapters. Now the chapters at the top, I have Daniel 2. I need my little highlighter. I hope you can see my my cursor. I have Daniel 2, then Daniel 7, then Daniel 8, then Daniel 11, and Daniel 12. Now, these are the 4 lines of prophecy in Daniel. I say 4 because Daniel 11 and Daniel 12 are the same prophecy, just that it's divided up into 2 chapters, right? So you have the prophecy of chapter 2, which was Nebuchadnezzar's vision. Then the prophecy of Daniel 7, which was Daniel's vision, first vision. Then the prophecy of Daniel 8, which was the second vision. Then you have the one in 11 and 12, which was his third vision. So you can divide up this dividing line goes right down. That's chapter 2. That's chapter 7. That's chapter 8. And that is chapters 11 and 12. Now, on the going across, you have the first part of the prophecy. And you'll see that the top of the image represents Daniel. The lion represents I said Daniel, Babylon. And so you have the different sections going across, okay? So we're going to look at these sections in a little bit more detail. And what I'd like you to be bearing in mind is whether or not you can see a clear pattern that will convince you, that can convince us that this makes clear sense, you know? As one of the things that, you know, I've tried to emphasize is that if you don't see the pattern, if you can't see the big picture, you're going to have a problem interpreting the prophecy. So I always believe in the big picture. And in our study this evening, that's one of the things I'm trying to do. I'm trying to highlight and to bring out the big picture. So the first part of the image is what I want to emphasize first of all. This upper part here. And what you can see is that the vision of the vision relating to Daniel, the book of Daniel. My brain is kind of mixed up. I said the wrong thing. The vision relating to Babylon, I mean, okay? It has to do with the first part of 2 of the prophecies, Daniel chapter 2 and Daniel 7. This is where Babylon appears. Now, there's no Babylon in Daniel 8. There's no Babylon in Daniel 11. And of course, not in chapter 12, because 12 is just an extension of chapter 11, of the 4th prophecy. So you have Babylon represented in chapter 2 and chapter 7. Why isn't it in chapter 8? Because there's a principle in the prophecy that I want you to understand. There's a principle that God follows when he's dealing with the prophecies of Daniel. He deals with the kingdoms that are existing and the kingdoms that are in the future. He does not, in the book of Daniel, he's not dealing with the kingdoms in the past. That's important to understand. When you come to the book of Revelation, it's a little different. He's looking at all the kingdoms from the beginning to the end. But in the book of Daniel, it is not so. The book of Daniel is focused on the present kingdoms plus those that come in the future. All right? So when you look at the book of Daniel, there's no mention of the kingdom of Egypt. There's no mention of the kingdom of Assyria, because these kingdoms have passed away. Their time on the stage of world history, when there were great kingdoms, this is past. And so they are not mentioned in the book of Daniel. Instead, the book of Daniel begins with the kingdom that is ruling at the present time. and that is the kingdom of Babylon. So in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, the first part of the image is made of gold, representing the fact that Babylon is a part of history at that time. And when you come to Daniel 7, when Daniel had this vision, we also see Babylon represented as this great beast, this lion, because Babylon still has a part to play in history at this time. But when you come to Daniel 8, Babylon no longer exists. Well, when Daniel had a vision, Babylon existed, but it was on the last legs. It had no further part to play in world history. And so in Daniel 8, there's no representation of Babylon. And in Daniel 11, likewise. Daniel 8 and 11 is dealing with the future to the time of Babylon. So there's no representation of Babylon. I think that should be simple enough to understand, but just in case I have not made it clear enough, if you don't understand what I just said, I invite you to stop me and let me repeat it. All right, so that was the first part of the image of the prophecy. Now, when you come to the second part of the prophecy, as I said, Babylon disappears. But the second part of the prophecy, as you can see by looking at the label on the left, we have the Medo-Persian kingdom represented. Now, the Medo-Persian kingdom was made up of two kingdoms, which is the kingdoms of Media and the kingdom of Persia. Both of them united together to form a coalition, making one kingdom. Part of the reason was that the king of the Medes was the uncle of the king of the Persians. Cyrus was nephew of Darius. And so both kingdoms united together to form the Medo-Persian Empire. And there are the Medo-Persian Empire, you might say, is represented in several ways. If you look at the image, this may not be significant, or it may be. The image, the part of the image that represents Medo-Persia has two parts. There are two arms represented here. I don't know if they were folded in Nebuchadnezzar's vision, but that may be suggestive that there are two arms. I don't know. But definitely in the other two visions, chapter 7 and chapter 8, you can see Medo-Persia represented, because it says that there is a bear with 3 ribs in the mouth, and it raises itself up on one side. God does not put that in the prophecy just as an interesting little tidbit. It's there for a purpose. The bear raises itself up on one side, and this indicates that although there were two empires, the two kingdoms, Medes and the Persians, the Persian Empire was more prominent, was far stronger than the Median Empire. So the Medo-Persian Empire was raised up on one side. At first, it was the Medes who were in the ascendancy, because history suggests that Cyrus allowed his uncle, out of respect, he allowed his uncle to be the first ruler in the kingdom. But when Darius died, Cyrus became the king. And I think it says, if we can look at the chapter, I think it says that the higher part came up last. Let me see. In Daniel chapter 7, I think it says that the higher part came up last. It doesn't actually say it. I don't think so. It says, behold, another beast, a second like to a bear, to raise up itself on one side. I'm not sure that it says the higher part came up last. Let me see. No, I don't see where it says it. So maybe this is something in my mind that is there for some reason. But anyway, be that as it may, there are two. The bear did come up on one side, and also when you look at the vision in Daniel 8 representing Medo-Persia, you see that the goat had. Oh, now I know where the higher one comes from. The goat had 2 horns. It's in chapter 8. It's in chapter 8. You go to Daniel chapter 8, and it says the goat had 2 horns, and the higher one came. The ram had two horns, and oh yes, here it is. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and I saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. You see how precise God is in the prophecy, because the Medo-Persia had these two parts, and one kingdom was in greater ascendancy than the other. But the higher one came up last because Cyrus became king after his uncle Darius died. The Persian side gained the ascendancy only after the Median side at first was the ruling part. Okay, so every detail of the prophecy, God gives us great detail in these prophecies. Now, I'm not going to comment too much on chapter 11 because chapter 11 is very complicated. But if you look at the screen, you will see where I have a verse in chapter 11 that corresponds to what we see in chapter 2, chapter 7, and chapter 8. You know, in chapter 11, it says there, it talks about the remaining Persian kings. All right, so here's the thing. Up to this point, we can see that there is a correspondence between the prophecies. The first two, Daniel 2 and Daniel 7, they have a clear reference to Babylon, and these correspond to each other. The next part of the image, the arms of silver, it's clearly in Daniel 2, it's in Daniel 7, it's in Daniel 8, and it's in Daniel 11. The Medo-Persian Empire is there. So we move on to the third part of the prophecy, the third element. And of course, we recognize that the third part, if you use the image as your guide, then you'll see that the third part of the image represented the Greek Empire, the Greece Empire, or the Greek Empire. And what we see is that this is also represented, the Greek Empire is here in Daniel chapter 2. It's represented in Daniel chapter 7 because it is represented as a leopard that rises out of the sea. And what we should notice about this leopard is that he has 4 heads and he also has 4 wings. Now, when you go to Daniel chapter 8, here's the thing now. You go to Daniel chapter 8 and you see things begin to get a little bit more complex. Becomes a little bit more complex. All right, well, not quite yet, okay? I don't have, there's something in chapter 8 here representing the Greek Empire, which I don't actually have on my drawing. And what I mean is, there was a goat. There was a goat. And let me go back to the Bible to read it. It says, as I was considering, he was watching the ram. He saw this ram, the ram with the 2 horns. As I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and he did not touch the ground. The goat had a notable horn between his eyes. He came to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing before the river, and he ran unto him in the fury of his power. So the goat attacks the ram. And it says, he was moved with choler against him, and he smote the ram, he brake his 2 horns. There was no power in the ram to stand before him. But then you go down to the next part, verse 8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great. When he was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones toward the 4 winds of heaven. That's what I don't have on my diagram. I should have had it, but I don't actually have it, because what should happen is that this little horn here, this notable horns, I make a reference to it here, but this horn is broken off, and 4 horns came up in its place. I just have a little reference to it right here where it says 4 horns arise. But I don't actually have the drawing of it. I know that when you see a drawing, it tends to stick in your mind more. So I just have the words there, but I hope you'll remember. All right. So anyway, the point I'm making is that you can see clearly that The Greek kingdom, the kingdom of Greece, it is there in all four prophecies, chapter 2, chapter 7, chapter 8, and also in chapter 11. It's there in all of them. And up to this point, everybody will agree. There's hardly anybody who studies the book of Daniel who will disagree with what I have said already. Babylon, fine. Medo Persia, fine. Greece, fine. The four horns, fine. Everybody is together. But it's when we go to the next part of the image now that problems begin to arise, that people begin to make problems. Because what happens next? Let's look at what happened next. Things begin to get a bit more complicated. The next part of the image is, of course, the legs of iron, which represents the kingdom of Rome. Now, when you go to Daniel chapter 7, we still don't have a problem. This is here, Daniel 7, the legs of iron. Daniel Daniel 2, I mean. Chapter 7, you see the same symbol. You see the same thing represented. There is a great and terrible beast, which we clearly understand represents the kingdom of Rome. When you go to chapter 8, what do you see? This is a problem. When you go to chapter 8, they say that Rome is not in chapter 8. Now, clearly, up to this point, everything has been in harmony. Everything has been in harmony right across. Everything in harmony right across. But when you come to Rome, they say, no, everything is not in harmony. This is in harmony. This is in harmony. But they say, this horn, that cannot be Rome. That is where they stop and they say Daniel 8 is out of sync with the rest of the book. Because they say that exceedingly great horn does not represent Rome. They say it represents the Greek king Antiochus Epiphanes. And it's very important because some of the outstanding truths that we believe are kind of related to Daniel 8. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit more. But this is the problem, okay? This is the problem. They say that Daniel, that this little horn, not this little horn, this exceedingly great horn does not represent the kingdom of Rome. So here are a few strange things. I'll show you why this is strange in several ways. I know that if you are not much of a student of the book of Daniel, all of this might be irrelevant. But based on the fact that we are students of prophecy and we are studying together, I have to bring it out because you will meet upon many videos, prophetic representations. If you look at them, if you go to Daniel 8, probably all of them will say that Daniel 8 is talking about the Greek king Antiochus Epiphanes. And even many Adventists now are saying the same thing. But I hope you can see, just looking at what we have looked at so far, I hope you can see why immediately this creates a problem, because it means that this part of Daniel, this chapter in the book of Daniel, or this part of the prophecy does not fit with the rest of the book, right? Why is it that all of a sudden in chapter 8, God is no longer dealing with the history of the world, but he stops with the history of the Jews and the Greek kingdom? Why does he stop there? Because all of the other prophecies go right across. They go right down, and I'm going to show you where. I'm going to point that out. All of them go right down to the destruction of the great beast. But they say this one stops with the Greek kingdom. And that does not make sense. Daniel 8, we don't know. Why would Daniel 8 be any different? Now, here's the thing. You look at this horn. Let's just take a moment and look at this little horn. I'm going to go back to the Bible and point out something. Let's see what happens with this little horn. I should say this great horn, because I keep saying a little horn, but the Bible does not say it is a little horn. It says there came up four notable ones. There were four horns that came out of the first horn that was in the goat's head. It was broken off, and four more came up. Now that first horn in Daniel chapter 11, we are told that it's the first king of Greece. As a matter of fact, it's in the same chapter. Let me see if I can find it. It says, the ram that you saw having two horns, they are the kings of Media and Persia. And I'm going to interpret it to say they are the kingdoms of Media and Persia, right? Because many times when the Bible says, or when the prophecy says king, it does not mean a king. It means a kingdom. You can find that in Daniel chapter 7, verses 17 and 23, where it says, the four beasts are four kings, and later on it says they are kingdoms. The word kings and kingdoms are used interchangeably in the prophecy of Daniel and Revelation. So it says these two horns are the kings of Media and Persia, and yet this cannot be, and I'll explain why. Because when the goat destroyed the Medo-Persian kingdom, it did not have two kings. There were no longer two kings. By this time, Darius was long dead and gone. So it's not talking about two individual kings, it's talking about two kingdoms. So it says, the ram which you saw having two horns represent, it should be the kingdoms of Media and Persia. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. Now in this place, it seems to refer to an individual. But so it says that the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. But it could also represent the first stage of the kingdom of Greece. Because it says, now that being broken, the first stage of the Grecian kingdom, where Alexander represented Greece, that stage of the kingdom was broken. That being broken, Alexander the Great died. His united kingdom was broken up into four. Four stood up for it. Four kingdoms shall stand up out of that nation, but not in his power. You notice what the Bible does. It does not say four kings shall stand up. It says four kingdoms. It supports what I'm saying. It's not talking about four individual men. Just like how these kings of Media and Persia is not two individual men, it's talking about the two kingdoms themselves. And so the four kingdoms that came out of the Grecian Empire, yes, at first there were four men who stood at the head of these four kingdoms. And that has kind of colored how I think about this, because when I first read about this, reading the book Daniel and Revelation, it stated that these four horns were four individual men. It talked about Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy, the four generals of Alexander. And that kind of sticks in my mind, and it sticks in the mind of people who read it or hear the study. You think of four men, but actually, here the Bible says it's four kingdoms. So it's not the men so much. And why is this important? Because they always make the point that a horn represents an individual. And that's why they say that this horn here, that's why they insist that this horn here, let me highlight it. That's why they say that this horn here represents Antiochus, because we have said that this horn represents Alexander, and the four horns that come out of this horn represent the four generals. And so if you are consistent, then you have to say that this little horn here, this exceedingly great horn, is also a person. And that's why they say that this horn is Antiochus Epiphanes. But I think, based on what we just looked at here in the Bible, we can see that that is not perfectly accurate, because it says, four kingdoms shall stand up, but not in his power. It's not four kings, but four kingdoms. And it says in verse 23, in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressions are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. It seems to be speaking of a man, but as I pointed out, when it says a king, based on what we just looked at, it is most often speaking of a kingdom. His power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and so on. He shall destroy, prosper, practice, shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And it goes on to talk about what this king or this kingdom will do. Let's go back to our diagram and see why this is significant. So All right, let's reconfigure what we see here. We see that the goat has a notable horn, which is the first part of the Greek kingdom, or if you want to be technical, you can say it's Alexander the Great. But then it's broken into 4 parts. The kingdom of Alexander is broken into 4 parts. So the Greek kingdom is broken into 4 divisions. Then out of one of these divisions, there comes this exceedingly great horn. And they say that this is Antiochus Epiphanes. Now, the first thing that I will say is, the first question I will ask is, why, as I said, why is this section of Daniel 8 so much out of sync with all the rest of the book of Daniel? Let me move my chart up where we can see the rest of the chart, and you will see why this doesn't make sense. So I'm going to go with the interpretation. I'm going to go with the interpretation that this horn represents Rome, because if we are consistent, we should go right across. This exceedingly great horn represents Rome. Now, Rome, as we have seen from chapter 2 and from chapter 7, Rome has 2 parts. You have Rome, the Iron Kingdom, and you have Rome, the toes of iron and clay, the feet of iron and clay. That's also Rome. And so Rome has the terrible beast, and then the 10 horns on the head of the beast, and then the little horn speaking great words against the Most High, that persecutes the saints of God, that tries to change laws. So all of this, let me go right across. All of this represents the kingdom of Rome. You know what? The whole thing looks so untidy. Let me clean it up and go again. All of this represents the kingdom of Rome. If we can see the harmony of the chapter, if we can see that all of these chapters are in harmony, that's what we would have to conclude. All of these represent the kingdom of Rome. So this is the one, this is the part that people would take out. They say this doesn't belong in here. All right. But I wanted to look at something. I'm going to point out something. Look at what it says. Let me use a different color. Let me see. All right. It says of this little horn here. This little horn. He speaks great words against the Most High. Look at what it says, the one in chapter 8 does. It says he magnifies himself up to the Prince of the host. He exalts himself up to Jesus. Look at what it says about this one in chapter 7. He persecutes the saints of God. Look at what it says about the one in chapter 8. He casts down the host of heaven and the stars down to the ground. Same thing, different words, same thing. This one says he tries to change times and laws. The one in chapter 8 says he takes away the daily sacrifice, he casts down the place of the sanctuary, and he casts down the truth to the ground, and he practices and prospers. Both of them are following the same pattern. And if you go over to chapter 11, you can see the same thing happening. The king of the north magnifies himself above God. He has indignation against the holy covenant, and the saints fall by the sword. He takes away the daily sacrifice, he pollutes the sanctuary, and he places the abomination that makes desolate. So the similarity between the works that is being done by the 3 powers in these 3 chapters speaks very clearly to the fact that the 3 chapters are focusing on the same power. It seems very clear that, you know, we're not talking about 3 different powers or even 2 different powers. The similarity is so striking. This is why I believe that when it says that this little horn represents Rome, I believe that is the correct interpretation, because you can't have another power in here. You can't have another power in here that is so strikingly similar to Rome in all its facets, and yet you say it is not Rome. That's one reason. And secondly, you can't have the book of Daniel so much in harmony, all the parts, and yet you come to this one chapter and suddenly it changes. It's no longer talking about, it's no longer focusing on the same theme as the rest of the book. It does not make sense. Now, I don't know if I'm losing anybody, if I'm leaving anybody behind. So let me remind you that if I'm going up over your head, if I'm going too fast, if I'm not clear enough in what I'm saying, please stop me. I am hoping that the diagram itself can help us to understand, but in case I am not doing a good job of this, please stop me. Now, all right, let's continue. You see where we come to the end of during the time of the kingdom of Rome, during the time of divided Rome. It says that a stone is cut out from a mountain, and the stone smites the image on the feet, destroys the image, and the stone becomes a great mountain and fills the whole earth. So, since we are looking at a series of prophecies that cover the same ground, parallel prophecies, I believe that this prophecy in Daniel 7 goes straight to the end of time, just like this one. And it makes sense that in chapter 8, it does the same thing. And it makes sense that in chapter 11 and 12, it does the same thing. All of the prophecies go right down to the end of time. Of course, they say that this one stops. They say that this one stopped 2,600 years ago, in the time of the Maccabees, in the time of the Greek king Antiochus. They would take this one away. But this one here goes straight to the end. The stone becomes a great mountain. This one goes straight to the end. The saints inherit the kingdom. This one goes straight to the end. God's people delivered here in Daniel chapter 12. Everyone goes to the end. But they say chapter 8 is different. All right, they would take out this part of chapter 8 and says it has nothing to do with the end of time. It has to do with the Jews. And as I said, my very messy chart, I hope you're following me. As I said, that does not make sense. All right, so let me clear this mess. So the next thing that happens on this chart is that during the time of the kingdom of Rome, something happens, and I wanted to see how we go straight across. Follow the line. The stone is cut out of the mountain without hands. In Daniel 7, when you come to that part, it says the judgment sits. When it says that the stone destroys the image, it says that Christ receives his kingdom in Daniel 7. The Son of Man came before the Most High, and there was given to him a kingdom. When you go to chapter 8, what do you see? What event in chapter 8 corresponds to this? It says, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. The cleansing of the sanctuary corresponds to the stone being cut out and the image being destroyed. It corresponds to the judgment sitting and Christ receiving his kingdom. So that is why I believe that the cleansing of the sanctuary has to do with the judgment and Christ receiving his kingdom. The last thing that happens is that the stone destroys the image and becomes a great mountain. If you go to chapter 7, it says that the beast is destroyed and given to the burning flame. The image is destroyed and the saints inherit the kingdom. Over here in chapter 8, it says that the horn is broken without hand. Okay, how can that apply to somebody like Antiochus Epiphanes? When the Bible talks about something being broken without hand, it is talking about God's divine intervention. God has stepped in and God has done something. There's no human hand that contributes to the end of the horn. And that is why I believe that this beast and this horn, over in chapter 7, what happens to the beast? The beast is destroyed and given to the burning flame. He's not destroyed by any human hand. He's destroyed and given to the burning flame by God. In chapter 8, the horn is broken without hand. And when you go to chapter 11, what do you see? You see, the king of the north, he comes to his end and there's nobody to help him. And at that time, Michael stands up and God's people are delivered. All of the prophecies come to the same end point, including chapter 8. And these are some of the reasons why I believe that in this prophecy in Daniel chapter 8, what we are looking at, brothers and sisters, is clearly 4 lines of prophecy that cover the same period of time, including Daniel chapter 8. Now, let me pause a little bit and inquire if there is any question that anybody would like to ask, or anything that is not clear that needs clarification, or any discrepancy that you think I overlooked. Anybody? It's nice to think I did a perfect job and there are no questions. You know, it's hard to believe, but it's encouraging if that is the case. All right, so I'm done with my chart. I would say if somebody were to ask me the question, where are we then on this chart? I would say that all of this is clearly gone. All of this is what I believe to be in the past. All right? These are all in the past. So I would say this is interesting background information to let us know how we can move forward. But I would say that where we are at now is right at about this point. And what we are looking for is for the stone to destroy the image, for Christ to receive his kingdom, for this process of the judgment, the sanctuary being cleansed, to be completed. The northern king will go out to destroy. The power of the holy people will be scattered, followed by the destruction of the beast, followed by the horn being broken without hand, followed by the king of the north coming to his end, and then Michael standing up, and there's a great time of trouble. So this is where we are. We're at this green part of the diagram where the green line is. The stone is cut out, the judgment sits. The sanctuary cleansing, or the sanctuary, I don't believe that cleansing is the right word. I believe it should be restored. It's a restoration of the truth, the sanctuary truth, which makes it possible for the judgment to take place. That's where we are, and that's what we're involved in. We're understanding again the truth about the sanctuary as a part of the process that Christ is going through to examine his kingdom. It says judgment, okay? But I prefer to say the examination of the kingdom of the 2 kingdoms. And so this part of the image, this part of the prophecies of Daniel, as I said, I believe it is past. So the book of Revelation now is dealing with this part. This is what Revelation is dealing with. And that is the part that concerns us, this bottom part of this diagram. So even from looking at the diagram, you can see that proportionally, we just have a small part of the prophecies left to be fulfilled. You know, a lot of what we look at is background information, and then we're going to be moving on to the real critical part of this prophecy.
I have a question, David.
Yes, Brother Joel.
In 8 of verse 11, where he says, Yea, and he magnified himself even to the Prince of Hosts, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, place of his sanctuary was cast down, and an host was given to him against the daily sacrifice by reason of his transgression, and it cast down through to the ground, and practiced and prophesied. What is this host that has been cast down by this system?
Okay.
Particularly in verse 10, when it says, And he waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them.
Right. It's clear that this cannot be talking about heavenly beings. It's very clear. The first part of it it waxed great even to the host of heaven. Could be referring to heavenly beings, in that this little horn assumed some of the prerogatives that belong to heavenly beings, because as we know, a part of the whole system of the papacy was that it claimed the prerogatives of Christ. So we could apply that in that way for argument's sake. But the second part of it definitely could not be interpreted in that way. When it says it cast down some of the hosts and of the stars to the ground and stamped upon them, it's very clear this has to be speaking about God's people. You know,
Yeah, I suspect, but I'm not sure if you'd agree with me, but it is reference to the truth of God that is being destroyed by the system. I suspect that's what it is, because further down it is to mention that truth is also cast to the ground and stamped upon, the same way it describes the host being stamped upon.
hmm. Um, possibly. Um, I I I hesitate to look at the word host as referring to particular truths, but just because it would be unique to this part of the Bible, because everywhere else that you see the word host, for example, the prince of the host, a host was given him against the daily sacrifice. Wherever it talks about host, it usually refers to some kind of group of people, an army. You know, the Lord of hosts is a God of armies. The God of a multitude is what it usually means. So to apply it here to mean some particular truths,
Well,
I would.
I'm not saying truths, but it is God's people that are the arbiters of truth, and the destruction of God's people, in my mind, is the destruction of truth in some sense, because the language is metaphoric in some sense, isn't it, David?
Well,
So
definitely.
I'm stuck. Go ahead. I'm sorry for cutting you.
Yeah, man, no problem. Yeah, I agree that I'm agreeing that it's metaphoric, and um, what you just said, if it suggests that some of God's people have been cast to the ground in the sense that they have embraced false ideas, that idea is more sounds like more like in harmony with how I could see it,
I
you
wouldn't have
said.
a problem with that.
Right, right.
All right.
As I understand you to be saying, that is, yeah, I can accept that.
All right. Thank you, David. It makes that's the only thing that was giving me a little bit of issue, and everything else for me seems kind of spot on. I do have some question about on the chapter 11, but you haven't touched on it yet, so I don't want to run ahead of you.
Yeah, I'm a little bit afraid of chapter 11 because I understand it so little, but
Understood. Appreciate it though.
all right, Joe. Yeah, so even we could even just take a slightly closer look at this particular passage, since Brother Joel brought it up. You know, um, the 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 whole passage, as has been traditionally interpreted, say by people who have an Adventist background, I can't embrace the way Adventists approach the passage, but I I believe in the end point. The end point is that there is a pre-Advent examination. You know, they have made the pre-Advent examination a judgment that jeopardizes people's salvation. I don't accept or believe in that, but as we have seen clearly, there is a pre-Advent judgment. There's an examination of the two kingdoms. Now, in Daniel chapter 8, I don't see that Daniel chapter 8 is focusing on the judgment. It's focusing on something else that happens, which needs to be fixed in order for the judgment to take place. What do we see happening? Look what the little horn does. It exalts itself to the host of heaven. It casts down some of the host and the stars to the ground. Brother Joel and I just were talking about that. And it stamped upon them. He magnified himself even to the prince of the host. Who is the prince of the host? I mean, the prince of the host is unquestionably Jesus Christ. The prince of princes, the prince of the host. That is another reason why it's impossible for this to be Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes never exalted himself to the place of Christ. That's nonsense. The person or the institution that exalted itself to the place of Christ was the papacy. And by him, the daily was taken away. The word sacrifice is a supplied word. And when you think of the daily, what daily was taken away by a power that exalted itself to the place of Christ. And I think when you look at it and understand the symbolism, it is saying that, you know, that the daily sacrifice was a sacrifice that was offered morning and evening. But in the Christian dispensation, what is the equivalent of the morning sacrifice and the evening sacrifice? It was called the
Jesus.
continual. Say again. You're saying something, Brother Joel.
Oh, sorry, I wasn't aware my mic was open when I said it. I was saying Jesus has become the sacrifice. He himself is our sacrifice, the morning and evening sacrifice, isn't he?
Absolutely. Jesus is the new covenant equivalent of the old covenant evening and morning sacrifice. So the papacy, the institution of the papacy eliminated Jesus' place as mediator from the Christian church from the great majority of the Christian church for generations, hundreds of years. The daily was taken away, and it says the place of his sanctuary was cast down. That is striking in that even today, the majority of Christians in the world have no or very little concept of the meaning of the sanctuary service, and especially as it relates to what Christ is doing right now. I'm speaking to people who understand this because we have discussed this and we have been going through the studies of the feasts of Israel and so forth and the Day of Atonement. The majority of the Christian world, the great majority, reject this reality of the present ministry of Christ and what the sanctuary service represented. All of that was eliminated. Jesus was taken out of the way, and human philosophy was put in place of it. And it even goes on to say a host was given him against the daily by reason of transgression. It cast down the truth to the ground, it practiced and prospered. Now, this is the context in which we see the question. One saint or one angel speaking to another angel said unto that certain saint which was speaking, how long shall be the vision concerning the daily and the transgression of desolation to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden underfoot. The question is, how long is this treading down of the truth to continue for? How long will it be until this perversion is corrected? How long before things are made right? That is the context of what the question that is being asked here. It is damage done by the little horn, and the question is how long before it is repaired? And that is when you come upon the verse 14, and he said unto me, unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. This word cleansed is from a Hebrew word that has at least four different meanings that we could put there. It means justified, it means vindicated, it means restored, and it can also mean cleansed. Adventists fell upon the word cleansed, and because of this, they went back to Leviticus and they saw that there was a service called the Day of Atonement when the sanctuary was to be cleansed, and they tied it to this passage. And so they came to the conclusion that this is talking about the Day of Atonement. Well, I'll tell you what, in my opinion, they accidentally stumbled upon the truth going by the wrong road, because you couldn't go by this road to come to the judgment, and you can't go by this road to come to the Day of Atonement, because what this is talking about in context, and this is why a lot of people have problem with the Adventist interpretation, because this is not talking about the Day of Atonement, and it's not talking about the judgment. It's talking about the restoration of what the little horn cast down. That's the context of this passage. Somebody's gone this because they say, why is Adventist interpretation so important? I'm sorry. I am discussing this from the perspective of my understanding and how I come to this understanding. If because I mention Adventism it offends anybody, well, I just have to say good night. Farewell.
David,
So, yes, Tracy.
I just have a question.
Yes.
Based on what you're saying and the questions that were asked, the two angels are saying how long the various things will be done, the transgression of desolation, and so forth. And the answer to the question that is unto 2,300 and 300 days. Based on what we have been studying, we know that it's not an investigation of the saints, whether they are in Christ or not.
Right.
It's more of looking on the kingdom of God. Now, why does it need a time? Probably my question is, layman, what happened then? Why is this time so critical? Because you go back and this time from the prophecy ends at 1844. If it wasn't that, which I don't believe that it is, what specifically, since it's an investigation, let me use that word lightly, looking into the kingdom, as it were, the setting up of Christ's kingdom, what his people were showing forth as the fruits of his work, his kingdom, why that time? Why that time becomes so important?
Right. Now, this is why I went through this chart before, because what I'm trying to say is that if you look at this chart, you will see that where it talks about the judgment sits, see, it corresponds to the cleansing of the sanctuary. All right. So the restoring of the truth corresponds to the sitting of the judgment. In other words, if we never had the restoration of the truth about Christ's high priestly ministry, if we never understood the truth about the Day of Atonement, the judgment, what it takes for us to be in harmony with Christ in terms of the judgment, we could not understand the reality of this judgment and what it means. So it was a part of God's plan, and it was put in the prophecy here that the sanctuary was going to be restored. All the things that were cast down by this little horn, these truths that were obscured, was going to be restored. And this corresponds to the time when the judgment sits. Right? So God actually told us the time when this restoration would take place. Because at this point in time, we can look and see the beautiful harmony between the time when the truth is restored and the time and the reality that the judgment is taking place. Those of us who have been going through the studies of the book of Revelation, you have seen, I believe we have seen how beautiful it is when we understand the truth, and we have been able to see how much it impacts upon our lives and our experiences. But in order for for us to really appreciate it, we needed to understand the restored sanctuary truth. And so God was telling us about a great work of restoration that would take place in this time, which corresponds with the final work of the judgment. So I don't know if that answers the question, Tracy.
Yes, I'm getting what you're saying. It's not necessarily that something culminated then, but a work started at the unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed. So when you said that it relates to all the things that the little horn had cast down, then at this time we would have a restoration of the truth to the world or the people of God beginning. So it's not say it happened one time then and that was it. It's a continue. That's my understanding. This restoration continued beginning then and it continued to the end when that stone is cut out of the mountain, and then the kingdom of God not will be expanded throughout the world.
Right, and the other key thing to remember is that the finishing of God's work among His people is to some extent it depends upon God's people understanding and believing. You know that the benefits we gain from God, the work God does through us, to a great extent is dependent upon we believe what God says. We understand His purposes and we are in harmony with it. The book of Revelation is given to us in order to prepare us for what is coming. I absolutely believe it's not just so we can study and say, hey, I understand the Bible a little bit more. No, the book of Revelation is given, it says, blessed are those who read and hear and keep. The book of Revelation is designed by God to accomplish a certain work among His people in a time when we need something special. There's an experience we are to have, and it seems to me that this experience is dependent upon our understanding. So part of God's work, a part of the process God take us through is restoring some vital truths that are necessary for us to understand. So the restoration of the sanctuary is a critical part of this. So as you said, it started at a certain point, but I think even that starting point made a great impact, and we're building on that starting point, yes, as we go forward. But it wasn't just like it was a minor start. I believe that Adventists stumbled upon. I don't say stumbled. I believe God was leading in that early movement, and He led them to see certain things. And the fact that they never continued in the direction, or things became so perverted because of an emphasis on legalism. I think that's what messed up things. In the honesty of my heart, I think that's where things went wrong. And the fact that that happened in no way negated God's original purpose.
True. Thank you.
You're welcome, Tracy. Brother T, you wanted to say something? Go ahead.
Yeah, let me ask you a question about the pre-admin judgment and the close of probation. Now, when we all was in the church, they harped on that the Adventists was God's people, and that the close of probation will come upon them before it come upon the world. So, speaking about God's people, do you think it's true about God's people? Not saying Adventists, but God's true people, that probation will close on them before the world? Are they
Um,
prejudged first?
yeah, when we talk about God's people, usually people are speaking about a named group or a denomination. God's people as His true people, those who are born again and who have the Spirit of
Right,
Christ.
right, right,
I don't, well, as you know, those are not identifiable by any particular name or group today.
right.
So those people, I don't know how we would look at their probation being closed, because those people are the people who are saved. They're already saved.
True, right, right. That's what I'm saying. Right, right, exactly.
But in a sense, I will say something, which is that the people who have, in a sense, there's some truth to that statement, because the people who understand the God's ways, best of all, like for example, at one time it was the Jews. Okay, so let us say there are many Christians today who have a better understanding of truth than other Christians. The ones who understand truth the best, I think that they will be tested earlier than others. For example, let us say, for example, that the issue was we were going to be judged on the basis of how we understand righteousness by faith. Let's just say, for argument's sake, then the people who would be clearly tested when, if a crisis comes concerning righteousness by faith, then the people who will be tested are the people who understand it best of all, because you understand what is happening before anybody else. So it's going to test you before other people catch up and they begin to understand, and then it becomes an issue for them. But you would understand first of all, because you have a grasp of the issue long before everybody else. So it just makes logical sense that the people who have a greater grasp of truth would be tested before other people. Just logically, that makes sense. So from that perspective, I would say that if you have groups or denominations who have a good understanding of truth, they would
Okay,
logically come to the test first.
okay. What do you mean by tested?
Well, we know that the Bible says that there is coming a great hour of temptation, which will try those that dwell on the earth. Revelation 3 and verse 10. God is
Right.
allowing the crisis to come to put everybody to the test.
So
Now,
aren't there? Okay. So so you saying that their probation won't be closed until they had a great test?
yes, that is the time when we talk about the close of probation for the planet, and it comes to the close of probation is, I don't think it's like a day when God flips a switch. I think the close of
So okay. So the great so is the great test you talking about the mark of the beast,
yes,
or could it be another test?
I think it's a mark of the beast.
So you don't think that people's probation will be closed until after?
Anybody whose probation is closed before that, it's a rare individual, rare. There are not many people in this world who have ever had their probation closed. There might have been some extremely significant people, like Judas, for example. Okay, Jesus called him the son of perdition. Clearly, he closed his own probation. There are people like this, but generally, even reprobates on their deathbed, often they find that the door of grace is still open for them. So the close of probation, generally speaking, is a certain period of time when God compels the entire planet to make their decision. He allows the whole planet to come to a place where they are brought to a crisis situation by a great test that compels them to make a decision. And as soon when they have made that decision, then they rapidly deteriorate, or they either go down or up rapidly. The crisis matures everybody, because that's a point too that needs to be understood. A crisis matures you into what you are. That's why this morning, as a lot of people were commenting about the trials that you go through. Trials either break you or make you strong. Fire destroys trash and it purifies gold. And so that's what God will do. God will cause a great furnace to arise on the earth, or He will allow it to make the trash come to maturity and the gold come to perfection.
So how do that coincide with the unpardonable sin then?
Well, that's why what I say, that the unpardonable sin is when it happens to some people from time to time, but it is a rare thing, because the unpardonable sin is where you push God away so far that there's no longer any hope for God to reach you. And I'm saying not many people get to that place.
Okay.
Only when that crisis comes, because that crisis is allowed by God precisely to bring the world to maturity. You remember He said in the parable, let the wheat and the tares grow together till the harvest.
Right.
So while people live, generally speaking, they have opportunity for salvation. But in the coming mark of the beast crisis, this is why it will be such a striking, terrible thing, because it will create a situation that the world has never seen before, where the entire planet is divided into two groups: the saved and the lost, the wheat and the tares. And not just saved and lost, but irrevocably lost and unshakably, unchangeably saved. The world has never seen that place where a Christian can no longer lose his way, and a reprobate can never turn. That's what the mark of the beast crisis is about.